Hello, everyone. Luis Lopez here. We're back for a new module, and this one's all about EQ. I love the subject. I've been waiting for a long time to talk about it. There can be a lot of tentativeness. There can be a lot of brutalness with it when it comes to EQ. I'm going to say that both of those things are sometimes necessary, but at first we're just going to learn what the basics are, what are the different types of filters we use, and what even is an EQ. So we've been doing a lot of mixing. I've been showing you this track a lot, this Brazilian track, and we can go into our mixer window, and I can balance out the sound of each individual sound with these faders here. We do this so that we can get the right coloring, the right feeling for the music, and make it sound as somewhat as idealistic to our inner ears vision of the track as possible. Right. This is the exact same thing as EQ, just on a smaller level. Here we're dealing with individual instruments, but with EQ we're dealing with one instrument but individual frequency ranges. These are known as bands. Okay, that's one descriptive that's used a lot in EQs is a band. Okay, a band is just a range of frequencies. Okay, let's first talk about all the different types of filters, and I'll start with the ones that are one that is used the most often in the mixing world, and that is this one. Every single one of these filters has its own a name, which we'll go over. This one's known as a high pass filter, or HPF. It's also known as a low cut. Those terms are super confusing, but let me try to clear both those up. So high pass filter, meaning this is the shape of the filter. It's also obviously cutting the low end, cutting meaning attenuating or decreasing the low end level, but it's also allowing the high frequencies to remain untouched or to pass through, hence why it's called a high pass filter. So I have this up on a bass track right now, so we will really hear this this particular filter in play. Let's solo this track and hear what this filter sounds like on. You can just clearly hear that it cuts out a lot of the low frequencies. This is pretty typical of DJs to sweep between songs, or for the intro or outro of a song, or to lead into a chorus or something like that. So it can be used in a creative way, absolutely. For EQing individual instruments, it's a really great filter for queuing out the low end. Actually, on my voice, I have a high pass filter on it right now. Let me have you listen to it with it turned down. It's at 80 hertz right now. Let me turn it down to 40 hertz. And let's turn it down all the way off. You can probably hear the AC noise in the background a lot more with that low cut off. Let me turn it back up. Here's 40 hertz. Here's 80 hertz. Here's 120. My voice is going to start to sound a little thin now. And here's 160, even thinner. And that's the limit of my interface here. So I found that a reasonable spot for my filter on my microphone is 80 hertz, because my voice tends to resonate somewhere around 120 hertz. Okay. You'll find the same thing for your voice if you track it enough. So that's our high pass filter. Let's go on to the next one. Since we have a high pass or a low cut filter, guess what? We also have a low pass or a high cut filter, right? I'm just going to change where that frequency starts to attenuate. This is known as the roll off frequency for both high and low pass filters, for obvious reason. That's where it's the attenuation starts to roll off, right at that point in particular. So this is known as the roll off. Let's hear what this one sounds like on the bass. Now, you would think that on a bass that there's no high frequencies. It's the bass. It's called the bass. So why would we use a high pass filter? Well, let's take a listen. So very interesting. So I've noticed that just around 5K even, I'm already hearing it really affect the frequency range of this particular bass. He's doing what's known as slapping the bass, so it's creating a lot of high frequency content. But we can see that high frequencies can exist in bass lines. So another reason why not to just EQ anything just because it's of what is called, what the track is named, right? Really listen to the different frequencies. The next type of filter is the one you're going to see the most often, and it's known as just a peak notch filter. That is what we have right here. These three center frequencies are both known as peak notch. Now you can, as we've talked about, you can boost these frequencies or increase the level of those frequencies, or you can cut the frequencies by decreasing them, right? So this is a peak notch filter. Let's hear what that sounds like. Let me sweep across the frequency range so you can hear it in action. So kind of a cool effect, even just that. But this is probably the most useful, most Swiss Army knife type of filter that you'd use, this peak notch filter. And it's used to control like the center frequencies most often in a track. The next one are these ones on the ends. These are known as shelving EQs. And every type of EQ is named after the frequency range it is occupying. So right now I am lowering this shelf right here, but it is still called a high shelf filter, okay? Because it is shelving the high frequencies, right? This is also a high shelf. So where it is, whether it's boosting or cutting, it's always known as a high shelf. Just like in the bottom region, this is always known as a low shelf. Even if I'm raising the frequencies in the lows or cutting them, it is always known as a low shelf filter because it is affecting the low frequencies. But you can see that it increases the low frequencies or the high frequencies at the same level across the board. Now, I often get asked, like, well, when would you use a high shelf or a low shelf in a mix? And that's a tough question to answer. But for instance, let's say you had a piano and it was recorded with like a ribbon microphone, which normally has a sloping kind of ascending sound, but you wanted to bring air or brightness to the high frequency range. I would then use a shelving EQ, I almost never use a low shelf just completely on its own. I always use it at least in conjunction with a high pass filter because I can be bringing up a lot of muddiness that I don't want to hear, especially in this low 20 to 30 hertz range. But if I were to use it, maybe a tom or a kick drum or a bass needs a little more fullness in the low end, I might use a low shelving EQ. Right? Cool. So there's some other ones. There's a type of filter that will completely cut out a frequency at a very somewhat narrow Q. This is known as a notch filter. and it will completely eliminate a frequency that may be bothering you in the mix. I typically don't use these for mixing, but every so often there is just one frequency in a guitar that's ringing out, or in a bass line, or some frequency that's really, really harsh that you want to just completely cut out, but you don't want to affect the neighboring frequencies around it. Or maybe, it's ringing out at some points, but at others, fundamental frequencies are at that point. So sometimes that's why I typically don't like to do this, because it's so dramatic. But if you have a really, really specific frequency, let's see if I can find one here. So just to demonstrate this. I mean, it's a pretty well recorded track, but if there's a bad frequency, like single frequency that was ringing a lot, I'd use a notch filter. Otherwise, I'd do some other less aggressive type of filtering. Okay, so another one that we can use is known as a band pass filter. So band meaning a range of frequencies, and pass meaning allow them through. So that a band pass would allow only a single band of frequencies to pass through. We use this typically with our control shift function in this EQ to highlight certain frequencies. So this is a band pass filter, only allowing one range of frequencies to pass through to kind of search for things, right? But this is this can be a filter that's used for a creative purpose. Let's see what this sounds like just sweeping back and forth. A fairly cool sound. Rarely do I use it just for just a static thing. I'll usually use it as a sweeping type of filter, but it's there nonetheless, right? Another type of filter is known as a resonant filter. Now it's a little hard to recreate this. This EQ doesn't really allow you to do that. But a resonant filter, if you want to think resonant filter, think Jimi Hendrix using a wah pedal. That is exactly what a resonant filter is. But technically what it is a bandpass filter that actually increases the level or the amplitude at what's known as the center frequency, or the frequency that you are adjusting for the filter, right? And I can't move this all as one entity here, but imagine, actually, let's do this. Let me take these off and just use this one and then boost it while I'm listening back. Then you'll hear what a wah pedal might sound like. Right. You can also make that sound with your voice. And it's known as like a diphthong, right? Wah, 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 has a kind of nasally resonance to it. So that's what's known as a resonant filter. And then there's the most boring of all, which is a all-pass filter, meaning no frequencies are attenuated or boosted or cut. It's just a flat filter response. This is used more in synthesis and not really in mixing, but thought I'd throw it in there just for a laugh. But that kind of gives us the range of all the filters that we have at our disposal. Next, we're going to talk about the different types of EQ. They're limited, but they have certain functionality. So stay tuned.